Welcome, everyone, to the Deep Dive, the podcast that skips small talk and goes straight for the concepts that shape our thinking and behavior. In this podcast, cold expertise is defenestrated as warm philosophy is enthroned in an attempt to explore the field in which we're all scientists looking for answers, living well. Hello world, welcome to another episode of the Deep Dive with Eyal Shai. Today my guest is Jibran el Bazi. Hi Jibran.
Hi, good morning.
Good
How are you doing?
I'm pretty good. And without further ado, I'd like you to let us know what you're going to talk about today.
I think an interesting subject to talk about is connection, especially like in the last 10, maybe 20 years, we've been going online so much through the communication, through the internet, that sometimes I feel we're actually losing connection. Maybe not, we now say everything is connected, the internet connects everyone, but sometimes we maybe lose connection with ourselves and maybe the deeper parts within others that we don't see as much anymore, because lots of the communication is more on the surface instead of on the deep end. Maybe because of the use of so much social media, everything is coming in and going out in small bursts where you cannot take a moment and notice it a little bit more or a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I agree. And it does seem to be a perennial problem today of they say it's a loneliness epidemic, right? That's what they say. So what is loneliness but lack of connection? And you're right, like immediately I think of the last time each of us spent just sitting with friends around a campfire. This is something that is almost hard to imagine, to spend hours together with somebody online and having these deep conversations. So we'll get to explore that from all sorts of angles. I want you to begin by maybe taking us as far back as you can in your life to experiences, and they don't have to be explicit thoughts about connection, but just maybe from the heart. Like, what are some meaningful connections that you can begin with?
Most meaningful connections for me now, so it's very recent, is my wife and kids. I mean, they are the world to me, and I feel as much connected to them as to myself. On the other hand, I go back to think of the earliest connection that I can consciously remember is, I think the close connection is with my younger brother, 2 years younger than me. As a child, we were very close and still are, with a small hiatus in between, but we grew up, we did all kinds of things together, and sometimes people thought we were twins, but that's because he grew taller than me much faster. Of course, parents, but it was almost as a given. So I think that's like the positive early connections I can remember early from life, and of course in between friends and family and specific experiences where I more deeply felt a connection in places of hardship, or on the other hand, places of extreme fun and joy with friends. But what I'm noticing now is that they are all moments and experiences that were offline, as in like in the physical world, those connections. So I think that's a big part of feeling connected. And like you said, the loneliness epidemic, I think, and especially now in the last 18 months or so with COVID, lots of people being disconnected physically from others, trying to make the connection online, but it's not the same thing. I mean, you can go very far, but you can't hug someone or look someone in the eye with the crisp resolution of reality. So
yeah, for sure. For me, the fact that you are choosing connection as a topic for us to discuss kind of implies that you had time in your life. Like, obviously now during COVID, you already had your family with you. But were there times of your life between those happy moments in childhood, which you just mentioned, which I'm very happy to learn that you had no lacking in. Between then and now, were there times where you had more trouble connecting with people? Basically, did it prove harder at some point? Did you came to a stage in your life where you were maybe chasing other things and realized that maybe you need to go back to having deep connections?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. So from my childhood, around 7 or 8, when I was becoming more conscious and seeing more of the world and people around me, I started to lose connection with lots of things around me, with school or teachers or kids in school. Sometimes I couldn't relate much to their experience, or they couldn't relate to mine. So I felt disconnected. I didn't really feel at home in any subgroup or identity. And at some point, well, that's the beautiful thing about the internet. When I got the internet, and when I was 11 or 12, I went on the web, and then I could find all kinds of interesting people and conversations and bulletin boards in those times, live journal, all those things, to connect with ideas and feelings that I felt, but no one in my small village was talking about or even knew about. So I very much went on a journey to understand myself and understand the world, but it all came from a feeling of feeling disconnected, of wanting to be connected. I didn't think of it consciously at that time, as in I feel disconnected, now I'm going to find connection, but I was just looking and to find myself, to figure out who I was and who I am. But then at some point when I was 17, 18 years old, the pressure of society and of people around me was becoming so big that at some point I lost that way of searching, of reflection, introspection, and the interest in psychology and philosophy. I think I left it behind somewhat. Also more the spiritual side of me, I put it away and very much fell into a very materialist, reductionist worldview, including chasing girls, partying, drinking, and all the earthly joys or pleasures, in a sense. But of course, in that sense, I also was forsaking or ignoring a part of me. But in that time, I dated, and then in that time, I also met my wife, and we bought a home and got kids. And that at that moment, when I became a father, it started to, that ego layer starts crumbling a bit again, that limited worldview, because so much love and connection really with myself and with my son and with my wife suddenly came up again like a volcano erupting and breaking away that layer of earthly attachments, desires that were actually somewhat superficial in a sense. But it also meant I started looking back at the pains and traumas I had, and the disconnectedness I still felt in other parts of my life. And so that was like 6.5 years ago when our son was born, and then when it continued, and then when our daughter was born, which was a very difficult period, it made me realize how much connection with other people is actually a word. It opened my eyes again to, you can also almost say like being connected is life and being disconnected is death. Such a strong polarity.
Terms. Yeah. No, that's amazing, and we'll definitely get to talk about family. I know both of us are family people. We love our families very much. But it's interesting that you highlighted along the timeline the fact that I think in early puberty or around puberty, we do seek people to connect with, but the connections are different. So it's really interesting to highlight that. I think, thinking about myself as well, I mean, obviously as a child, like when you said 7, 8 and before, the connection is very much kind of visceral and emotional. just with those caretakers around your close family members and just people who care for you, take good care for you, and you're relying on on them for survival, basically. And around puberty, it's interesting that we seek out these other groups that are not these people. And we realize that the people who are the closest to us may still be emotionally closest to us. But in terms of thinking, like it's almost, we have this impetus of doing something different from them and going and finding those other peer groups, whether it's around, I don't know, for me, it was like football. So I was on football forums and just exploring British culture through that prism. And, you know, nobody at home knew what I was doing on the internet. And I was just connecting with people like that. And in that, I think the internet is very good at finding people who think, who are like-minded, who share the same interests. And so that's a kind of connection for sure. Continuing to talk about our development as we get a little bit older, then we're trying to maybe, I think, really have an identity and become a kind of accepted member of society, which I think in Western societies, that means also doing these things of like partying, you know, chasing girls. I think that's the typical thing, proving yourself to be successful in a way, right? And wanting to fit in that sense. And then later on, you mentioned going back to this more deep connection and now taking on the role of a parent yourself, which brings us to the beginning of the cycle. So it's interesting how connection means different things, or we seek different connections. And yet, I think that the first stage of being a small child and maybe the last stage, we're still young, so hopefully we'll get to experience the grandfather's perspective of things. But the last stage for now of having a family, there is something that is deeper about that. And I think we can add those few friends who are really there, you know, who we've shared a lot with and sat around the fire with. And yeah, so that's fascinating to note. And yeah, now I would be really happy to hear from you just some of your thoughts about connection that you've developed and some of the feelings that you're feeling in the present day, like in the context of your family.
Currently, I like I said, I feel very connected with family, and like you say, close friends where you shared a lot with is also are very deep connections. But I'm also feeling a more deep connection, I think, with people that I don't know even, or just when I meet someone like you now or on the web, but also in person. The more that I am connected with myself, the more that I know who I am, the more I dare to look into someone else and look beyond the superficial ego or acts people do and try to look deeper. And that sense of compassion and connection, I think that's very valuable to have. And in before, when I was younger and struggling, or in the time as an adolescent, very much, like you said, chasing girls, partying, whatever. In those moments, I wasn't looking within myself, not feeling really connected with my inner self. So that meant I was also not connecting with the inner parts of other people. So the connections there were also very shallow. So the more I am connected with myself now, the more I can connect with other people. I think there is also it could be a tangent, but I think it's interesting. I saw a Twitter thread a few days ago about someone asked the question, how difficult do you think, I'm paraphrasing, but how difficult do you think it's getting into a relationship or finding a partner or of that kind? And it was pretty sad. All the replies, or many of the replies, were very depressing. People didn't think they will ever get a partner or a romantic life. But if you look through the tweets of those people, they're very interesting people with interesting ideas and lovely comments, and people maybe feel such a disconnect with parts of themselves. Also, probably because a lot of the parts of themselves are maybe wounded or hard to look at because it's maybe traumatic or painful. But if you then don't look at those parts, you feel disconnected from yourself, and then it's very difficult to connect with someone else. And then you can make excuses of not finding someone else or connecting with someone else, be it a romantic love, but also friendships. I'm thinking you don't have to be perfect, or you don't even have to necessarily change those traumatic parts of yourself to fall in love or to connect with someone else. You just have to look at them and accept them, and then you can connect with that part, even if you think it's maybe ugly or painful. If you can connect with those parts of yourself, then you can also connect with other people that maybe have their pains and traumas, and look beyond those pains to what's in them, and then you can create a connection. So bringing it back to myself, I was also very much in the past not daring to look at my own pains. I didn't feel as connected as I am now to the people around me and the people I'm meeting now. And that's why I think to create a good connection between people in the world, it's very important to start reflecting, doing introspection, or start to accept yourself, really. So I'm not sure if I was answering your question necessarily, but
no, you totally were. I'm interested in some of the maybe techniques or simply maybe chance occurrences that led you to these realizations. Were you consciously employing some technique to kind of get in touch with yourself and be at peace with yourself and know yourself better at some point?
Yeah, both consciously and unconsciously. So the unconscious parts are just, that's the experiences life gives you. Maybe not what you want, but what you need. And also consciously, what helped me a lot were a few things: writing or journaling. So writing down what I was thinking at the moment, not trying to direct what I'm writing. So it's an exercise. It's called morning pages. Maybe if you've heard of it, maybe you don't. But what you do is you sit down, you write for like half an hour, and you write down everything that comes up. If it's like I left on the light in the bathroom, you write it down. It's almost like meditation. Everything that comes up, you just see it and you let it go, but you let it go through writing. And at some point, your conscious mind is emptying, and what comes up is the parts of your unconscious. And then you start writing them down. And what happens is that you suddenly see certain topics or subjects or problems that are like that you've put away in your shadow side start coming up, and you can look at them objectively, like later, but also in that moment. And if you do that, like say for a month every day, what will happen is you'll see a theme in the topics that come up. And if you don't deal with those problems or topics, then your unconscious will just keep popping them up when you write. And if you then start working on them, then you can maybe actively grab one of those problems or topics, and then start doing introspection on them or talking about it with other people. And then you can try to see where it comes from, maybe a certain pain or experience from the past. So that's something that was very useful for me. Also, some mind-enhancing substances were very useful. So I'm not sure how deep you want to go into that, but those were very...
As deeply as you want to.
Okay. So yeah, I've only experienced with two kinds, with MDMA as a therapy, and the power of that was, for me, it took away like all the anxiety I had, all the fears about the problems I had, the fears about connection with other people I didn't have, and what was left was only love, pure love and compassion, and not romantic love, like just pure love for myself and the people around me and everyone. But you're still very conscious. And what happened is that I could then look at all those, attachments or expectations or things that I wanted or was fearing, look at them objectively, or not even objectively, but through a lens of love, and see how I was torturing myself really with all those thoughts and fears. And then you can deconstruct them. And if you can deconstruct them, then you can understand them. If you can understand them, you aren't afraid of them anymore. And especially with love around it, you create a new memory around those traumatic experiences. And then you can after coming down, days, weeks, whatever, years later, when I now look at some of the fears I had, I can look at them with new eyes, really. I also know people use it sometimes at parties or festivals, but I haven't experienced that, so I don't know. It's probably fun, but I really see it as a form of therapy, like self therapy. And I think even in the United States now, they are doing clinical trials with MDMA assisted psychotherapy. It's insanely powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Tim Ferriss wanted to help people with PTSD. I think he was benefited by using MDMA, and then he met the creators of a movie called Trip of Compassion. And it can be found on his blog. So it's tim.blog/trip.
All right.
And it's a movie about the phase 2 clinical trials with MDMA assisted psychotherapy in Israel. But everything is translated into English. So it uses footage from actual MDMA assisted therapy sessions with severe PTSD patients. So everything you just described so beautifully, and I had experiences with MDMA in a way that was not like a party setting for sure, but also not strictly therapeutic. So somewhere in between, like just having one or two friends, like kind of just walking around nature and night and sharing what we had on our hearts. So I can definitely agree with you on the effects of it, although I think you put it excellently into words. So Trip of Compassion is something that people interested should definitely watch, and it's a very interesting substance in terms of what it can do. Like, let's not say we condone its use here, but yeah, it can teach something about connection. Of course, it works on different systems of the body that relate with physical closeness and emotional closeness. So serotonin and oxytocin are both produced in mass quantities. There are side effects, like a few days later you might feel depleted. So it's not side effect free, but it does interesting things. And I agree, it can really make you feel connected to everything, even blades of grass. So thanks for sharing that. And what would be another thing that kind of got you closer to yourself and then others?
As in kind of substance, you mean, or
whatever. I think you mentioned another one. So up to you.
The other is psilocybin mushrooms. So they grow everywhere, but in the Netherlands they are legal also. I had a few experiences with increasing doses. So first I had the microdose, and what happened was I was just writing. It came a little bit more out of me while writing, more of my, I'd say, inner life or who I am. And then I didn't do anything for a long time, and then I took a medium dose, and lots of things came up. And one thing I do have to say, if you go into it with I want to get X out of it, you won't get X out of it. You get Y out of it. It has not happened. I've only done less than a handful of times, but every time it was very painful, not physically painful, but emotionally painful, but always valuable. And sometimes people may say you get a bad trip, but I think a bad trip is when you start feeling the pain. Those are pains like from trauma or experiences that you don't want to look at. They start coming up, and because I see it as your subconscious wants to show them to you to do something with it. But if you try to suppress them, then it's a battle, and it's a battle you're going to lose either way. Either you won't get out of what you want of it, or you'll get terror or bad trips or so. What I always did was surrender to it. And then when you surrender to it, it can be very sad, because you re-experience certain feelings and memories that are well, for a specific reason, put like way back in your subconscious because they are so they hurt so much. But every time I then looked at them, I could take lessons from it and increase my happiness, connection, everything after. And I think with psychedelics, the experiences are a little more varied between people and also between each experience. While with MDMA, it's usually more of, you know what to expect after you've taken it once. So, but both are kind of different. So MDMA, really no fear, no anxiety, only love. And with psychedelics, for me at least, it's making you re-experience something, but at the same time, look at it from a like meta perspective, and then you can also deconstruct it, and that's something interesting. I also had most of my, I'd say, almost revelations about things in the world, or insights about the world, or my connection with people, or how people act on psychedelics. It's almost like sometimes it's interesting. Sometimes when you have a conversation, I think the last not podcast conversation that we did, we were talking very like back and forth, interesting ideas, and sometimes a psychedelic experience can feel a little bit like that, like insight and interesting bits of new information. It has a bunch of things. So I'm digressing a little bit. So with psychedelics, it's hard to recommend because your mindset and the setting matter very much, and maybe if a trip sitter is there that can guide you is a big difference, whether you're inside or in nature, or it has much more variables to keep in mind using it.
Right. Yeah. That's fascinating, and again something I've experienced as well with mushrooms. So I don't want listeners, if you're listening, I'm going to tell another psychedelic story, but it's going to segue into really the next thing I want to discuss, which is kind of the connections with people again, and with family specifically. But yeah, as I told you before, Jibran, there's a story in my life, a psychedelic experience, which is really a before and after moment in my life. I'll tell it very briefly. I'm not sure if the whole thing is on record yet in some other episode or not, but I ingested about 12 seeds of a plant called Hawaiian baby wood rose, or elephant creeper, something like that. The active component is LSA, so it's a kind of a brother to LSD. It's from the family. And it was interesting because it was actually connecting me like you would maybe expect with something like that. So for a while, I went through the quote unquote usual trajectory of just experiencing everything more vividly, enjoying the sensual perceptions more, seeing the beauty in everything, and then starting to feel like my body is dissolving and myself is dissolving and becoming one with everything, which is interesting because it tells you, basically this is ultimate connection. Like you are basically, there is no ego and you're just part of this bigger thing. So ostensibly, this means that you're at peak connection of some sort. But interestingly, I had my friend walking next to me, and I'm telling her, like, right at the peak of the experience, I'm here. I can see myself as one with the trees, one with the waterfall, one with the flies, one with you. And I could stay here, I don't have to come back. And so she told me later that on that day, like half her hairs turned white. And at that point, a little bit after that, I felt like I could stop my own heartbeat, and I stopped my diaphragm so I wouldn't breathe anymore. And now I'm not quick to judge and say, oh, this is what it was. It was up to me. No, it's probably just my mind on drugs. But what I started noticing is that with all this superficial connection with everything, I started really missing my friends, my family, and even just the people around me who I knew were going to experience something very terrible. if I were to flip there and never come back and, be lost in the woods or whatever I felt like I could do. And really the thing that kind of pulled me back into reality, pulled me back into communicating with people, was just this feeling of I do want the connection. I don't want to do this to them, because it's painful when a relationship you have dies. If your friend or family member or something dies, you don't really mourn the person themselves if they die, for example, or if they just get severely injured or incapacitated in some way. You could feel for them, but if they're dead, let's say, it's not that you think that they're suffering right now. What you're really mourning is that connection. So the poetic way of saying is like a piece of me died with this friend or family member, right? And I was just trying to feel that, and I began to come back into myself, and then talking with them. But the hardest part, and I also feel benefited from that experience. I had other parts of the trip I didn't mention that were hugely beneficial to me. So parts like when I felt a voice that told me that I was asking the questions, very much like you say, the questions that have been on my mind, but I wasn't really asking, or were causing me stress and anxiety. I was asking them, and I felt a voice. I didn't hear a voice, but I felt a voice telling me that it's okay. I can let go of these. And this stuck with me. I remember it to this day, and I'm able to kind of connect with that. And I'm thankful for that experience. But coming down afterwards, it took me, I think, a month to smile again. And it took me more than 2 weeks to be able to hold a conversation with people. And I would still kind of be annoyed with people because they could become annoyed with just small things. Now I had this access to this reality, right, on a different level, where I could see how small and petty the usual things we get riled up about are. And I found it hard to connect with people. And those were a difficult 2 weeks to a month. Also for the people who were next to me. So my friends saying like, you're not smiling. And, we just wish that it would come back. So I'm just pointing this out because it's interesting how you can go kind of full circle again, where you see it's like it starts out with what you think is connection with the whole world, like you are one with the trees and the birds and that. And then once you realize that you actually lost all connection with figures that really matter in your life, which are still people. And I really wanted to connect to this ego and self. And it didn't matter anymore to me that it's not real. Today I know in my mind, and also I remember the experience of not having a real self. I was joyful to go back into this self and connect with other people and connect with them on levels deeper than ever before. So that's just something to point out. And now I said it would be a segue to our next topic, which is kind of these intimate relationships, and maybe going into finding a partner and starting a family, which I know for both of us is important. So I'm interested in terms of the timeline. Were those experiences that you just mentioned already after you met your future wife, or was it during? And also, what kind of changes did you make consciously going into a relationship? Like, did you try to take measures to make it succeed?
So now all at least the psychedelic and MDA experiences were all in the last 2.5 years, 3 years. So and my wife and I are together for 12.5 years now, so that we've been together for a while. So that's one. And going into a relationship with my wife, taking measures to make it successful. Well, I was really just following my, that's interesting. And lots of the choices I made in life have been very much on the intellectual side, on the trying to overthink everything and then see what is the best decision. But being with my wife was like a purely emotional decision, and it's like one of the best decisions in my life. And that's Maybe we'll get there later with experiences of our daughter that I talked a little bit about with you. All the good decisions we made there were also based on feeling. So yeah, my wife or girlfriend at the time at university, like I was in love right away. I was like, damn, she's hot. And I was still very much in the
promising start.
Yeah, so I was like in the frame of mind of dating a lot and even close to like the pickup artist type stuff is really stupid. But anyway, it's just filling a hole within myself. But she was very hard to get. She wasn't naive or anything in that sense. So it was even more of a challenge for me. So we got to get to know each other a little bit, and I'm like, damn, I'm falling in love. What the hell? So and then she says, well, I'm going to Suriname for half a year. That's like after we met for a few weeks, doing my what do you call it in English, like internship in Suriname. And I already got had an internship fixed here in the Netherlands, and I'm like, damn, if she's going there for half a year, then it will probably be out of sight, out of mind, and it'll get to nothing. So I was like, yeah, but if I say I'll go with you, for example, it'd be kind of weird when we don't know each other that well yet. So I was like, oh right, my mother had a small cabin on a small island in front of the Netherlands, and I was like, I'll invite my girlfriend, or well, at the time we weren't even like boyfriend girlfriend yet, just dating. So I was like, hey, what do you think of going with me to the cabin for a midweek and just have fun, swim and things like that. But it was also kind of a plan for me to, okay, let's see how it goes if we are like multiple nights and days together, just the two of us in a small cabin. How does it feel? Is there any weird shit that I need to need to watch out for with her? Because the hot crazy scale, So anyway, so we went there, and like halfway during the week, I was like, "Damn, I'm so much in love." So I asked her, "What do you think if I go with you to Suriname?" She was like, "What? Are you serious?" And yes, she was like, "Yeah, of course, awesome." And so then I went to the university like board or examiners and said, "Yeah, I want to do my internship in Suriname instead of here." And they were like, yeah, that's not gonna happen. So they're like, if you go there, your internship will not count, and you'll have to do an extra year later. And so, but I was like, I didn't literally say the F-bomb, but I was like, well, I'm going anyway. So I went there with her, and I fixed my internship there, even though the university here said it's not going to count. Well, we were there for half a year. It was such a lovely time. We learned salsa there, Zumba, merengue, bachata, all those dances. We went into the jungle, talked with all the people there. It's very interesting. They speak Dutch there, so we could talk with everyone, but the culture is like totally different. It's like a banana republic. Right. So you immediately get into the maybe this cute segue to connection as well. You immediately connect to the people that are living there. You become part of society there, but maybe not as much, of course, if you lived in your own country, but because you speak the same language, they don't know if you've been there for like a month or 5 years. So they act toward, and because Suriname is such a melting pot of different cultures, they don't care how you look, what color skin you have, what accent you have, or whatever. So everyone treats each other as they treat everyone in Suriname, and you immediately get into the culture and are connected with the people. And we ate with different kinds of cultures and different homes, different people, and the teacher that was guiding us with the internship there. He took us to his family, and after we were giving our classes, he took us with his pickup truck, first getting some beer, and then and then going out fishing, and it was very, very fun. Anyway, my wife and I connected with each other there a lot too, because we lived together right away, even though we didn't knew each other that well yet. So it was kind of hard as well, because in Suriname, romantic love is a little bit more open, you might say, especially if you're not married, you're free game in a sense. So at the dancing school, all the guys were trying to, at least in my mind, but also, don't know, trying to
hit on your wife.
Hit on my wife, yes. or my then girlfriend. So I also had to deal with for the first time in my life, really the sense of jealousy, but also after Suriname, it was also gone. So it's a very good lesson. Anyway, we connected really there with each other, with the people there, and when we were leaving, it was also very sad, because we knew lots of the people there we would never see again. They gave so much to us of themselves, because that's also a beautiful thing, I think, in Suriname. People are much more authentic, at least than in the Netherlands. And it goes both ways. It can be rude, but also very loving. And we really missed that part when we came back in the Netherlands, of that connection with people that were really their authentic selves. Here it's very much, at least in the cities, and it's very much, well, the earthly desires, the status game, the money making. And
right.
There it was much less. It was very much in Suriname you say no spang, no stress, chill. So I am conscious that I lost my train of thought. You asked a question. I answered part of it.
No, that's perfect, and it's a lovely story, and it's kind of also a template to think of when you think of people actually connecting. I'm the same way, by the way. My wife and I just moved in. Probably like a month after meeting or something like that. So I resonate with that. No, it's lovely, and it's such a good example of how people connect. And I don't want to generalize and say that this doesn't happen, but I do think that it has changed in those past 12 years. Just the patterns of people doing that, especially in America, I think, where it's so obvious that as a young person, you're probably not going to change your internship or the new job you got. It's not going to go to a different city or something like that. It's so individualistic that you usually go wherever the job opportunity takes you, and so on. Yeah, so I think that really traces beautifully the beginnings of this relationship. And now, I know you have you also have a story about connection with your daughter, which you mentioned briefly about her birth and the beginning of her life. So would you also share that with us?
Yeah. So 4.5 years ago, our daughter was born in the hospital, luckily, and also barely. And well, when she was born, and I took her out. She was very beautiful. It's to tag back. It's like an MDMA experience, as in so much love you feel. But then we got an umbilical cord, and then we held her for a few minutes and checked everything. And at some point, we noticed that the breathing wasn't going okay. And then a doctor came and put a little mask on her mouth and nose to give some oxygen. And it didn't really get better. So the doctor was like, okay, I'll turn up the oxygen. And the doctor saw that the oxygen was already at 100% of what she was getting was already 100% oxygen. So the doctor was like, this ain't good. So immediately she went to the ICU of that hospital. And well, everything went downhill from there. So I'm not going to in as much detail as this, because then I'll be talking for 3 months. So then from one hospital to the next, and then to the next, and we finally, within 12 hours we were 200, 300 kilometers away in another hospital with her, and she was on life support. The condition that she had, or well, still has, but it's like partially fixed, is congenital diaphragmatic hernia. It's a whole mouthful, but what essentially happened is that her diaphragm didn't close during the fetal stages, and her intestines were in her chest area, so that meant that her lungs meant two things. Her lungs, one, were less developed, as in much smaller, because they were pushed away by the intestines that grew there. And the second thing is that all the capillaries, like so the small parts of your lungs where the air comes in and goes out, are much more constricted, and that's something that she still has. And the combination of that makes that, like, well, in the past, like no babies with that condition survive, and like nowadays it's between 30 and 40% that survive, but only survive, as in like in the Netherlands with specific hospitals. So we have 2 hospitals in the Netherlands that both have 2 beds that can take children with this condition. So it's like only 1 in 20 or 30,000 babies born each year have that condition. So that's why we had to go to a specific hospital. And in that hospital, she was on life support for 90 days. And in all that time, we went through ups and downs of she maybe dying in 10 hours, or sometimes maybe dying in 5 minutes. And it was constantly like that for the first 90 days. There was no relief. There was no day of relief where the highest chance was that she wasn't going to die. And of course, we also had our son, who was 2. So the first 5-6 weeks he wasn't with us. We were living on the hospital grounds it's called, maybe it's in other countries too, but it's a Ronald McDonald house. It's like the one thing that I'm thankful for that McDonald's does and has. It's like they have a house with chambers for the parents of people with very, very ill children. And you can stay near the hospital. So we more than a dozen times we sprinted from the Ronald McDonald house to the neonatal intensive care unit, because it would be the last time we would see our daughter, or so we thought. And then yes, it wasn't the case. And remember, my wife just had childbirth, so running for her with her how do you call it, her hips, and it was horrible, of course. But our daughter was on the NYCU, so the neonatal intensive care unit, on life support, and it went from bad to worse. And every time that we were like, life can't get any worse, it got worse. And then the week, like in the second week, we wanted to go back to the first week, even though in the first week we were thinking it can be worse. So it maybe some examples to make it real for people. She was getting oxygen, and her chest was constantly thumping with a respirator, and she was connected through like 25 different kinds of medicine and adrenals and morphines and opiates and things, just to keep her body in homeostasis.
Is she in pain the whole time as well?
For large part, yes, but of course trying as much to lessen that through. So even after the time where she was out of immediate danger, so after the first 90 days or so, then came a month of insane, how do we call it, when you're an addict, like a heroin addict, and you have to
like withdrawal symptoms.
Withdrawal. She was so far into morphine use and fentanyl and all those kinds of things that her withdrawal phase had to use new kinds of drugs to try to relieve the old drugs. So give her new opiates that were slightly different, so the withdrawals wouldn't be so bad. She had more. She was essentially constantly near a threshold of overdose. Like, so, say a heroin addict takes a bunch of medicine and is almost overdosing. She was constantly near that range to keep her in a coma-like state, to operate on her, to try to relieve the pain. But oftentimes you couldn't give more because her receptors weren't accepting the opiates anymore. So, but if you give more, you damage other parts of her body. So sometimes, I'm digressing, but she got as much stuff in her as possible to relieve the pain and suffering.
And in terms of connection at that time, were you able to at all hold her? How did things go with like breastfeeding? Was there any of that, or is it all like
No.
She has to be sterile? And
we couldn't hold her. She was in a small baby bed, and
an incubator.
Even just turning her around, because we had to turn her around from belly to her back. We needed 5 people.
Wow.
Two on either side, and then one that was, because she was attached to so many cables to measure everything, and IVs for all the medicine. You had to flip like 10 or sometimes 20 cables or IVs with her at the same time you were flipping a baby. And every one of those IVs, of course, had a needle into her that hurt. So when flipping her twice a day was a horrible experience for her, because you see her heart rate spike insanely high, above 200 something, her blood pressure, everything, just from turning her around. The turning around was necessary because the fluids in her lungs are going to fill like the bottom of her lungs in a sense. So you have to flip around. Normally you move while sleeping, but because she had so much stuff put into her, she wasn't really moving much or at all. So we had to flip her around. But it also meant during the times we could not flip her, she had to be, it sounds horrible, it was horrible, drained of fluids. So within her, she has a tube all the way into her lungs that gives air, but within that tube there is a smaller tube with a suction unit on it, and you then suck and then drag the tube out and then put it back in and then suck again to flush out the moisture in the lungs. But that hurts insanely. So every time you do that, you hear every time I hear a sound of a specific wash bin or something giving a certain sound that sounds like that, I have to think back to that moment, because every time you see her face, even with all the stuff that's in her, she flinching from like pain,
writhing in pain.
Yeah. So that was like that were the normal good days, and then the bad days were when things started going bad. That she had to go to the operating chamber for different kinds of things. So one at some point was that she wasn't able to breathe even with maximum amount of oxygen and as fast of a respiratory rate as possible to not destroy her lungs. It was still not enough to give her enough oxygen to live. So what happened was that she had to be attached to an ECMO. It's an extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. I'm not sure if you heard about it, but what it does.
Yeah, you hear about it now with coronavirus patients,
yes,
right? With COVID patients.
Yes, and it's horrible. What you do is you sacrifice a artery in your neck. From there, a tube goes into the machine. Your blood goes to the machine and oxygenates the blood and takes out the carbon dioxide, and then goes back into the body. So you don't have to breathe at all anymore through your lungs. But of course, it has a machine of 2 by 2 by 2 meters next to this small little baby, keeping her alive. Yeah, it's insane. But but also necessary. But you get all kinds of complications with that. So one complication that happened was that her brain, because of the machine, you have to keep the blood. You don't want blood clots in there, so you try to make the blood more. The viscosity of the blood is getting higher.
Blood thinners.
Or low. Yeah, blood thinners. So, but it also meant the blood went more to parts in her brain that normally don't go there as deep, but still sometimes clots can continue. So what happens, of course, was that a clot got stuck there, and she got a brain bleeding. And so at some point, a third of her brain was pushed all the way back just by blood. And that at that moment, she had to be disconnected from the machine to go to the operating chamber and take out the blood clot and open her skull. But of course, the machine was there because she couldn't breathe. So if you take out the machine, she will die. And in the previous week, we already tried to wean her off. That's what they call it, to lower the machine rate of flow of blood through the machine to her, and bring up again the air to her lungs through the respirator, so you can take off the machine. And it takes 42 hours to do that weaning. And we tried 3 times, and every time the 42 hours we couldn't go to a level enough. Her breathing couldn't take over. And when she had that blood clot, she had to be taken off within 2 or 3 hours, because else she would just be a vegetable after. Her brain would be gone, essentially. So, and this is like, I think this is like maybe the first real miracle, in a sense, I'd say, that I saw there with her. Within 3 hours, we could wean her off the whole machine, which was in the full previous week. It didn't happen. It didn't work. And I can still remember the 2 doctors looking at the screen with her vitals on it, looking and staring in wonder with their mouths open, not knowing what was happening, that thinking the machines or the vital signs were off. It couldn't be that she was still having such a good high oxygen level while the machine was almost, the ECMO machine was almost not doing anything anymore.
Wow.
Well, at that moment, but we didn't have time to sit and stare. So the machine was detached from her, and like within 10-15 minutes, she went to the operating room, and the chance of her surviving that were nil, really. So for us was like saying, for the last time, saying goodbye. And then she came back, and we could see her, and she was covered in blood everywhere, and she was laying on her chest, and her whole skull had a big rip with they call it needle and stitches, and her whole face was swollen. You couldn't really see her face that well anymore, because she due to the ECMO, she had to lay in the same position all the time, which meant all the water in your body starts sitting at a specific part that's laying down. You see it more often with people that cannot move in hospital. So her face, you couldn't recognize her face anymore, and it was so sad. But also we were so full of love that she was still there, and our parents were there, and close friends and family. Yeah, we really cried a lot together there, and
yeah,
sorry, yeah, I'm
no, that's amazing, and it does sound like a miracle, like something that, even if even the doctors were almost not believing their eyes, then to me it sounds like an absolute fiction story,
yeah.
But I'm wondering, like, so you just had this daughter who, from the first moment of her life, basically had to be taken away and cared for, not by you as normal. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering about the kind of mindset that you and your wife had at the time. So you were lacking that connection. You couldn't hold her. Were you imagining a future at all, or even I'm tempted to ask, like, did you did you name her? Was it with a name? Maybe comes a sense that you were naming somebody, you were giving them something going forward, like a sort of thing. Did you even find time to do that? Anything like
Yes.
that? Yeah.
I'm getting a little bit of tears in my eyes. We thought of her name before she was born. We didn't know this would happen, of course. And my wife thought of her name, and I'm going to try to tell it without actually giving her name, because we have a agreement that we don't give our children's name on the web. Right. But her name means gift in a certain language. Yeah, she is the gift of life for us. She's given so much to us and the world. So yeah, and thinking of moments after, yes, I constantly had an image in my mind which felt very real, of her crawling in the grass in our backyard in the summer, and us all being there. And I constantly kept that in mind during the time. And of course, we sang to her. We held her hand as much as possible, if it was possible, next to her. We were always talking next to her, singing next to her, just to keep her there, to let her know that we were there, that there was someone, even if she wasn't sure or conscious, or on the outside, you sometimes can't see if someone is noticing things in their surroundings. And even if she wasn't, we wanted to be there for her when she was in those moments of consciousness or awakeness, that she would hear something. Maybe she wasn't showing it in her body or her face, but sometimes we could see in her heart rate that when she was in a lot of pain, that we started singing for her, that her heart rate started going down again. We really felt, to go back to the subject, really connected with her. We're also very grateful for the people around us that were there, because the only reason that we could also be there with her all the time is because the people around us were taking care of our son, cooking for us, cleaning our room at the Ronald McDonald House, taking care of our own home that was so far away, doing communication with our jobs that we had. My wife, she's an awesome wife. She was still, even though the chance of our daughter surviving was like 1 in a billion, or not even. I calculated at some point with the statistics of every operation and procedure and complications she had, what her survival rate would be. It would be beyond 1. Like, if this happened to 8 billion people, not even one would statistically survive this. Anyway, even with that chance, my wife was still how do you call it? Not breastfeeding her, but pumping it into bottles for her. So a friend, one of my best friends, he bought a big freezer, like this big freezer that you can fill like with a cow, as big, and he put it in our garage here at home, and he did like milk runs every week. He went to us with and other people also. There's like a big freezer chest, as in that fit in a car. He went to the hospital where my wife had bottled all her milk for the week, took it home and put it in the freezer for when our daughter would come home at some point, and she would still be able to get her mother's milk. That's connection, I think. So much love for the people around you, for your friends, your family, other humans. Also all the doctors and nurses in the hospital, they were so, even though it's their work, it was so clear that they were doing it out of love for all these babies that were there. So with such compassion, because every few days a baby would die on the ICU we were, and then you see a wall put up or curtains, and then sometimes a like sliding wall, and then you see family and you hear crying, and every time you hope it's not you, of course. but all those people working there see that day in, day out, and they work with such compassion, no bitterness, no. Maybe they feel sad sometimes, but they didn't show it. They were always loving and optimistic. And I think in our last conversation, I gave a small example of how I see that in my mind. Like every person has this flywheel, this big wheel, which can turn, and it can store energy in momentum. Like you like a train has a flywheel that creates momentum, and everyone has this flywheel full of energy. And some people's flywheels are turning slower, or some are faster. And flywheels, you can also create them as gears that you can then latch into each other. And what I saw was just all these people with all the energy that they have stored in their flywheels connecting to our flywheel of my wife and I, and of our daughter. And our daughter has, I imagine, has this huge heavy flywheel that is like is so heavy that get it to turn is so hard. But if you attach enough gears to each other, you can transfer the energy of all those flywheels, and then get that big wheel turning. And that's how I see those moments, but also the world. All flywheels connected, all with energy, and some parts have less energy but need it more. And then if you just connect with each other, you can transfer that energy to the places where it's needed. And that's how I see connection, really.
So it's you, your wife, the doctors, the friends. That's such a beautiful metaphor for it, and the way to think about it. How long did it take for you? Like at what age were you finally able to get in real touch with your daughter, hug, and start forming this deep connection?
So a few minutes ago I recounted the story of the ECMO. That wasn't even I'll keep the other one for later, but I'll give a short idea. At some point the doctor said it's going so bad, so that was after all this. It's going so bad you can take her in your lap, and then she can die in your arms, because at least then she won't die alone on the bed, and then you can also still have held her. In that moment, a lot happened before and after that moment. So it was so bad with her that we didn't want her to suffer any longer. And indeed, it looked like she wouldn't be there anymore in maybe half an hour. So we called friends and family to come to the hospital, so they would be there at least, likely after she would have died, but at least be there for us and also be able to see her. And in the time that we were calling, 10 minutes or so, what happened is that her. So the reason why the doctor said you can take her in your lab is because her oxygen levels were so low that she couldn't hold on to life any longer before just her body breaking down, and she couldn't go on the ECMO again because she already sacrificed an artery. So there was nothing to do anymore. So in the time that we were calling friends and family, her oxygen suddenly started to slowly go up back again. If we didn't call friends and family, if we didn't call our connections, we probably would have taken her on our lap already. So we saw that while we were calling, that her oxygen was going up a little bit, and my wife and I looked at each other and we were like, okay, let's give her one more chance, because she gave so much at each of these complications. She was so strong. They were like, who are we to take that her chance at life away from her if she wants to try again, maybe one more time. So her oxygen levels started going up a little bit and kept. It was still at a level that she wouldn't survive for probably a day or so. But in the morning, a doctor came in, a very wise old man, I think somewhere near 80 already, but he was from China, so he looked very young for his age. But he said, well, we can try one more thing. And it was something that's a procedure that they didn't really do anymore, because it had failed the last 10 times or so. It's using a big needle to go between the ribs and into the cavity where the lungs are, and extract the water or the liquid that's there, to try to give the lungs more space and hopefully more room to breathe. So in the procedure, well, the first time went a little bit wrong, but the second time it went good. And he told us after why they didn't really do it anymore, because most of the time they would hit a vein or artery and the baby would just bleed to death within 5 minutes. So they did, but it was like there's nothing else to do. So and it worked, and suddenly her oxygen levels came back to 58, 90, good enough to not destroy any parts of her brain or body. And after that, it was a road upwards with small hiccups in between, but it was up, so fast that at some point one doctor said, yeah, she probably has to stay like for 4 weeks on oxygen, on Optiflow, and suddenly out of my mouth came, no, it'll just be 4 days. I don't know why I said it, but and then it was on a Friday, and then on Monday that doctor came back, and we were sitting next to our daughter, and she didn't have any respiratory measures anymore, and he was like, what the fuck? So I am recounting a little bit of that story, but the reason after the fact that her oxygen levels started rising in those 10 minutes were very special to me specifically. In the day before that happened, so during the day, it was going pretty bad, and so bad that we were sleeping in the hallway next to the NYCU. So a small office was cleared, and two stretchers were put down for my wife and I. But I was as headstrong as our daughter. I was also headstrong and not wanting to give up. So I was doing what I do best, and researching lots of things. And I have a science background, so that helped a lot. So I was like into PubMed and all those scientific articles specifically about her condition and procedures, and also experiments done on lambs and goats. What can you do to help her? And I found one procedure that wasn't really done on humans yet, but on lambs already, and was giving a medicine called prostin. It's also something that that's a tangent. So it's something that a body also makes, but when a baby, I don't want to digress too much here. It's a hormone that can help in certain ways, and in that experiment, it showed that it could help give the lungs more room and less pressure to help with breathing. But it wasn't done in humans yet. So I mentioned that to the doctor. They didn't say much about it, but it did help, because during that night when it went so bad, like 4 hours before the moment we were almost, giving up, the doctor gave her prostin, and that helped alleviate the pressure around her lungs. And right in the moment we were calling was when the pressure was releasing, and she could breathe a little bit more again. And for me,
So you basically studied medicine the whole while, and then right when you were most needed, you came up with the solution to save your daughter's life. That's why.
But of course, I didn't know that was the solution. I just tried everything. Of course, there was no option to not try. Of course, we came with things like, we can do a lung transplant of us, or everything past the how do you say it? We want to do everything, of course.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, indeed, all the time when my wife was, for example, with her, and I was in the Ronald McDonald House with our son at some moments, I was constantly, looking through that indeed medicine. So yeah, I'm very grateful that I I have a biology background and could do that, of course.
So all that you mentioned, that's about the first 4 months of your life.
The first 3 months, yeah.
First 3 months, and after that, like, things got better. I understand, and you were able to not just dream of a future, but maybe begin to believe that it will come true and connect with her. Do you then start to kind of wind down from the experience, or is it something that, if left untreated, let's say, or unaddressed, do you think it just became your default to kind of take every day or every hour, like living hour by hour, because you've been doing it for so long? Did it stick with you, just the tendency to live hour by hour, or were you able to kind of breathe deeply and go back to a more normal way of being, which is, let's think about next week, about next month, next year?
Yeah. So in the moments when we came home, well, I first just broke down, like literally fell to the ground in both relief and like all the pressure from all those months. When we brought her home, it was, I can't really describe it. It's
I think it's ineffable, probably.
Yeah. So, but in those months after it, I felt very, like you mentioned a while ago, after your this Hawaiian psychedelic trip with those the substances. I felt really disconnected from other people in my life that are indeed worried about whatever, not having a specific grocery today at home, or a flat tire, or all those things seem so meaningless. But of course, your mind adapts again, and now I can also just worry about not having my egg cooked right. But less than before, of course. I mean, and it was very hard to for me, at least, to come home and not worry about her, because I've always been a worrier, very anxious. And when our son was born, I was very anxious of him dying for whatever reason. This is probably the first public confession, but I haven't kissed my son, at least not on his lips, for the first 2 months of his life, only on his cheeks, because I was so afraid of making him ill. That's the extent of how afraid I was of my kids being hurt or dying. And then I get a daughter where exactly that is happening. It's almost like the universe gives you what you need, in a sense. Even though it was like the most difficult ordeal with our daughter that I've ever experienced, it also gave me the biggest lesson that I needed, that life is impermanent, and that clinging on is not the answer, and that if you cling on, it's actually harder to connect with those who you love, because you are not looking at them and their loving parts, but you are looking at only at what you are to them, because you're clinging to them instead of letting them be, or accepting them as they are, and at the same time also accepting myself as who I am. I took a lot of lessons away from those 3 months in a hospital with our daughter, but it's not like I learned those lessons in the first week after and then started living like that. It took years, also because much of the stuff that it brought up from my own childhood, it was just hard to deal with, and then I also tried to hide from it through starting businesses, quitting my job and going freelancing. I threw myself into I need to make money, I need to be there for my family in a monetary sense, and all things like that. Just actually hiding again from those hard and difficult parts. But when I started writing and like I said earlier, taking a little microdose of psychedelics, I started to let out some of those things, and then also looking at all the experiences I had with our daughter that were in a sense a blessing to be able to connect with myself and with others again. And yeah, we did have a setback about 7 months after we were home. So when our daughter was 10 months old, she was again almost not there anymore. She had a kind of an epileptic fit, but she also choked in her own stomach stuff. Mm-hmm. But luckily we had a like video baby receiver. What do you call it?
Yeah, like a monitor.
Baby monitor, and I heard a strange sound. So I was like, I'll just go and look, and it was really bad. So I took her and ran across the street to a doctor. Our neighbor is a doctor, but he wasn't home. Then to another neighbor, he's a psychiatrist who was at home, and called the ambulance. And at that moment, I saw her life slipping through my hands, literally. After all that she went through, after all that we went through, and then suddenly again she was lost. And luckily the ambulance came in time, give her oxygen, but they couldn't. Yeah, it's what they try to do is give for an epileptic attack, give a midazolam and other opiates through a needle, but they used the needle and put it in her arms and legs, but they couldn't. It didn't connect with a vein because she still had all the scar tissue in her veins from those months in the hospital. So they had to drill into her leg, into the bone, and in the bone put opiates. Well, she's still a baby without any how do you call it? Nothing to relieve the pain. Right. And the first drill went wrong, so they also had to drill in her other leg.
Oh man!
And she was already full of scars. So that moment, I don't want to say it was harder than those 3 months, but it was like you. I don't want to make too much of a. I don't know how concentration camps were, but let's say you went through in a concentration camp in the Second World War, and you go through all the shit, and you get out, and you think you're free, and then you meet some weird, crazy Nazi in the woods, even though the war is over, and he does some weird shit with you and kills you. It's God giving you a kick after or something.
Right. Yeah.
So that was a very difficult. Few people understood. Also, my wife understood it less because she wasn't. She was with our son for the most part of that. She wasn't in the. So I was with her alone and our neighbor. So I couldn't really talk about it with many people. So that was a hard time as well. But now I've mostly dealt with, I think, almost everything. I mean, I can talk about it now without breaking down too much. And it's also because she has to go to the hospital at first, like every few months, and then every half year, and then every year. And every time we are there, it's like exposure therapy. But I remember those times running through the halls there, hoping to see our daughter for the last time. And now I can walk there with her in my arms. So you recreate, almost override those emotions with new good emotions. Wow. So that was very valuable. And the psychedelics also helped in part with that, and writing and talking about it with my wife and friends and family. So there again, to tie it back into the subject, if you go through such a hard experience, if you don't have other people to talk about it with, I couldn't imagine. I would still be. It would still be a big heavy load on my shoulders or on my head if I couldn't have talked about it with people. And that's another reason why I think connection is so important. It's like in Dutch you have a saying, gedeelde smaak is halve smaak. It means shared pain is only half the pain. And that,
we have something similar in Hebrew for sure.
Yeah. So and that's so true. So another reason why connection is so important. to share the load of suffering.
That's amazing. And I understand that in terms of living today, just this connection and connection with your family takes a central role where you're basically unable to prioritize something over it, which makes sense.
Yeah. So yeah, I see this. My family is like priority one, and then underneath that is, I think, sharing with just like a message. I think it's important for people to find their true self, get connected with their true self, and if they do that, then they also see that the selves of other people are also valuable, lovable souls in a sense. And if you see that, then you immediately see it in someone else, and if you see it in someone else, you can bring it out in them better, and then those people start seeing themselves as lovable and acceptable and get connected with themselves. It's like an oil patch or that's growing if you share the love or share the connection. And I think one thing that's so important is searching for who you really are, because then you get connected, and if you get connected, you love, and if you love, you are happy, and if you're happy, you're grateful, and then the only thing that's left is being grateful that you're alive or that you exist, which I think is very beautiful.
That's absolutely amazing. Yeah, I mean, such beautiful words, and I agree with every bit. And just your story. First of all, thank you so much for sharing and taking us through it. And I mean, there's something about you that even in the earlier story where it was just you falling in love with your wife, like even though there was a spoiler, I knew you were husband and wife today, I was still rooting for you. And that's even, and with your daughter as well, just it was so easy to get immersed in that story. So thank you for telling it the way it was, and in the way that you did. And it's one of those rare cases, usually somebody tells you a story and it reminds you of some sort of thing in your life that kind of resembles it, so you share that and arrive that. And that is just one of these stories where I doubt anyone I know has something remotely similar to that. So it'll take a while for me to process as well. Yeah, Jibran, I think this is probably a good way to bring things to closure. I think that connection personally is something that is so important to us, and realizing that there is almost like our lives and the lives of others, and then relationships are almost like entities in their own right. Yes. that live and grow and are characterized by the way people are treating one another. We just want to see more relationships that are based on trust, love, friendship, and all that. It's just a beautiful thing to see, because you can't be another person and you can't own another person so that you would really take pride in what they do or something. You can't own people, but you're literally in a partnership holding the rights for the partnerships and relationships that you have, and it's up to us to maintain them proactively and really make our life better. And I think the point that I will take from your story and everything you shared, is that, like you said, any sort of pain is only half a pain when shared with others. And but interesting that with joy, it's exactly the opposite, right? Instead of being halved, it's doubled, which is so interesting. It's not a symmetrical thing, yes. Right? Pain is halved, joy is doubled. So with that, what else is left to say? Is there anything you'd like to add?
I think you hit it right there. I think that's it. at least in the message connection. Yes, that's it.
Amazing. So lastly, I'd like you to share with everybody listening any details you might want to, any contact details if you want people to follow you on Twitter. I already told you I'd love to learn Dutch just to follow the podcast on the whole thing when you make it with your wife, and then everything else you might have to share with the world. So when you're going to announce it, we want to be able to hear it. So how do we do that?
All right. So I think the best way to find me is on Twitter at Ask Jibran, AskJibran, or on my blog, and then you can also email me there and read some articles that I write. It's JibranelBazi.com. I can say it, but you can just put a link there and it'll be fine.
Yeah, I will
as well. Yeah, so those two spots I'm active.
Beautiful. Well, this has been by far the most emotional podcast episode that I did, and thank you again so much. I look forward very much to keep in touch with you, and to many more, and to life.
Yes, to life. Right, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.